Nights at the Movies, a podcast with Miller and Leslie Heimbaugh. We are here today for our holiday edition of the podcast. And today we're going to be ranking our top 5 Christmas movies, including, a small spoiler, a discussion about whether Die Hard is actually a Christmas movie or not, and if it can even be considered on this list. My co-host here, Leslie Heimbaugh. Leslie, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Well, at least you didn't thank... but you did thank me for having you
I
again.
know.
You can't do that.
I can't do it.
This is your podcast.
I'm so happy to be here on my podcast. Thank you.
Of course. Well, one of the things we wanted to do as we, kind of round out our almost year of doing this now, it seems like only yesterday that we just started this, initiative to start our Nights at the Movies podcast. But this was one that we really wanted to do. Obviously, every year is full of holiday films that you always have to catch.
Yes.
And so I wanted to take the time, and this was one of the things that we talked about very early on that we definitely wanted to do. Because even as film buffs, we can even, admittedly, most of the movies that we're going to talk about probably aren't going to rank in the top 100 of IMDb or even be all that critically acclaimed, but they're still fun.
Yeah.
So this is a time for us to kind of talk about some of our, we'd already talked kind of about guilty pleasures, but this might be our holiday guilty pleasure
Exactly.
list.
That's a perfect way to say it.
Now, how did you approach this?
I didn't go for really two super sentimental Christmas movies because the truth is I'm not even a fan of like Miracle on 34th Street or the one with Jimmy Stewart. I can't even think of the name of it, but those are they're too corny for me. And I purely approach this from what makes me smile, or some of these, what really captures what Christmas is like for a child. Because I have so many fun memories of I would say probably the first Christmas I was ever aware that something big was about to happen. And my dad telling us that if we weren't asleep when Santa came, he wouldn't stop at our house. And so I'm laying on the top bunk of my bunk bed with my sister, and neither one of us can sleep. And then we see this airplane fly over with a flashing red light. I was positive that was Santa with Rudolph, and I'm like, how in the world is this even possible? I'm never going to get to sleep, and he's going to skip our house. And, from that to the little things of my dad taking bites out of the Christmas cookies, and spoiler if you still believe in Santa. And then taking it all the way to 3rd grade when I was in a reading group with some older kids, and my teacher prefaced her discussion by, "Of course, none of you believe in Santa." And my friend and I were like, "What?"
I don't even recall. I think if I remember correctly, when I kind of found out was a time when I was rooting around for things. And I found something that ended up ultimately being one of my Christmas gifts.
Yes.
And then I kind of put 2 and 2 together, and then I was probably about that age, probably 7 or 8, early elementary school. And I just remember finding something, and then I didn't at the time realize what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, maybe it was just a gift for someone else. And then I knew as soon as I opened it under the tree, and I kind of played along for a little bit just to sort of appease my parents.
Yeah.
But I will say that I believe that my kids believed a lot longer than I did.
Wow.
Now I know, so my son is 3 years older than my daughter, and my son's special needs. So he's still a kid that still really values things like trick-or-treating and
Sure.
We still say Santa, but we know he doesn't actually believe.
Yeah.
But I think that my daughter might have kind of gone along with it just for his benefit.
Isn't that nice?
And so it's hard to really say without grilling her about it, when she stopped believing. I think for a lot of people, it's more of a gradual process.
Yes,
it's not necessarily like maybe a situation like what happened to us. It's maybe still wanting to believe, but realizing that it's not really going on.
My movie choices sort of, several of them are around that fantasy of Christmas and just like being so excited you can't even stand it,
Well, let's kick it off. What do you have coming in at number 5?
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to break the ice on the Die Hard discussion because I've got that at number 5. But to me, that's not a traditional Christmas movie, and it's not about joy at all. But I could not resist putting it in there because of the discussions we've had about whether it is actually can be considered a Christmas movie.
So I actually have this coming in at number 3.
Okay.
So this is a great place to have this conversation.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a little aside here. And one of the things, the main pieces that we wanted to talk about today is this debate over whether Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Now, you prefaced, and I'm glad that you feel this way because this is going to make for some solid banter here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you prefaced it by saying that you don't really think that it's a Christmas movie. Why do you say that?
Well, you don't associate violence and explosions with Christmas. It's to me, Christmas is more of like this quiet, peaceful time of the year. I mean, families get together, and yes, they might quarrel a little bit, but it's really more about family and quiet for me.
So here's where I take issue with that, and this is part of the reason that I wanted to do this, and of course this is just friendly banter.
Yeah.
Okay, let me start with this question. So you preface by saying you don't think that violence equates to a Christmas movie. Okay,
I do.
By that rationale, do you have Home Alone in your top 5?
I do not, but I do like that movie. I do appreciate that movie, and I know that there's plenty of violence in that also.
So we can certainly come back to that because, spoiler alert, I do have it in my top 5, above Die Hard even.
Yeah.
And so the question remains. So I'd seen Die Hard. I'm a fan of the franchise. Die Hard with a Vengeance when I was growing up was one of my favorite movies. Still to this day is. I hadn't seen Die Hard in probably 20 years. I mean, maybe catching bits and pieces of it on cable, but very rarely do I just tune into a movie on cable and watch a couple minutes. Like, if I want to watch it, I want to watch it. This was my question. I actually had the same conversation with Jackie. What is a Christmas movie?
Right.
And I think that is all part of this. I think part of the reason, and I've actually read a few articles about this debate, which has been raging for years, about Die Hard being a Christmas movie. Now, for those of you who haven't seen it recently, I took notes of every Christmas reference in the movie, and I can tell you right now that I've got 4 pages of notes.
Isn't that amazing?
4 pages of notes. Now, it might just be a little Santa Claus here or a little comment there. And actually, just before the show, there is, if you've never seen it, go to IMDb's Die Hard page. You will find a trailer that came out for the 30th anniversary back in 2018, recut to make it appear as if Die Hard is a Christmas movie. I believe that the issue that people take with this is to your point about that we don't necessarily envision Christmas movies being violent, and I wouldn't call this movie gory, but there's lots of graphic violence.
Right.
Here's my problem with this whole situation. If you're going to say that, how can then Home Alone be considered a Christmas movie, which it is? I don't know anybody that doesn't consider Home Alone a Christmas movie. But to your point, the whole second half of that movie is violence. Now, yes, it's not graphic violence. It's not killing people. Though you could argue that any number of the things that Kevin did to the 2 intruders easily in real life could have killed them.
Right, right.
So I guess that is my issue here, is how can someone view Home Alone as a Christmas movie and Die Hard as not a Christmas movie? I understand the differences in the types of violence. The Home Alone is comedic. Yeah. It's funny. Somebody gets a blowtorch to their head and their whole scalp burned.
Yeah.
How is that different than Die Hard?
For me, well, I would say it's probably true of all my movie choices. A Christmas movie almost undoubtedly asks you to suspend your idea of reality for a couple of hours because there's really nothing that realistic about the concept of Santa or any of that kind of stuff. And Die Hard by nature has to be a Christmas movie because if John wasn't coming home across the country to his family for the holidays, the whole story wouldn't have existed. And, him coming home to his wife's work Christmas party, which is really what broke their marriage up, that she was too interested. Actually, they were probably both too career focused to have a marriage. So, but it's a great beginning for that story, because otherwise, why would he have ever found himself there?
The one objection that Jackie had was that there was no snow in Die Hard. And I said, well, it takes place in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
They're not getting snow.
It's true.
Though I would say that one of the things that I was reading today mentioned that after the massive, again, spoiler alert for a movie that's over 30 years old,
Yes.
At the end of the movie, when the top of the building is blown off and then everybody is rescued and gets down on the ground, you'll see the paper coming down.
Yes.
And some of the discussion online was that was kind of that representation of snow. I will go to my grave saying that Die Hard is a Christmas movie. And there's a couple of other reasons why. First of all, the soundtrack. You've got Christmas in Hollis by Run DMC. You've got the end of the movie is Let It Snow.
Yeah.
You've got John whistling Jingle All the Way as he gets on the elevator, as he goes up to the party. There were others too. And I mean, I don't want to just go through all of my notes here. Even one of the police officers singing Let It Snow.
Yeah.
There is Christmas music throughout the party. I mean, if you would just look at the soundtrack itself,
Right.
you've got more of a Christmas soundtrack than almost any other Christmas movie that you'd find.
Yeah.
Not only that, the color red is predominant throughout the film, which is, a lot of directors use color schemes that are meant to say something and to talk about a theme. But also, and potentially, most importantly, is a lot of just little comments that are made throughout the movie.
Right.
And to me, this is as much of a Christmas movie as any other. It was, it takes place on Christmas Eve, and
Right.
Hypothetically, I would imagine into Christmas Day, if you want to get technical.
Yeah.
So I guess I don't understand the pushback that people have on why this is. People are so adamant. It's like you're on one side or the other, right? I don't understand why people can't view this as a Christmas movie. If you're going to view Home Alone as a Christmas movie, this is equally as much of a Christmas movie,
Sure.
and Christmas being central to the plot.
Yeah, I agree very much so. I think it might seem non-traditional, but it's definitely a Christmas movie.
One final thought here before we move off of this. There were a couple of situations where people involved with the film kind of chimed in. First of all, the movie's star, Bruce Willis, emphatically said, this is not a Christmas movie. This is a Bruce Willis movie. Now, I don't know if he said that in a tongue-in-cheek fashion, just to kind of, say, put the attention on him. But I would say that Joel Silver, one of the producers, when this movie was being filmed and was put out into theaters, predicted 30 years ago that this would become a Christmas classic. And Steven D'Souza compared, in a very long sort of diatribe, who was also involved with the film, compared this to White Christmas and said that this movie is well more of a holiday film than White Christmas is. And that White Christmas, he made the case, was even more violent because of the time period that it came, because of the wartime situation. So, again, I think this is a debate that will continue to rage. But I am clearly, and here's what's really interesting. Without having seen the movie for a very long time, I went into this with an open mind, thinking, look, I'm gonna take a side, but I want to watch the movie first. Within 15 minutes, it was clear that it was a Christmas movie.
Right.
But again, it all comes down to what you think when you think of a Christmas movie and how you kind of put those into genre.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go, and of course, I'll come back to this shortly. I'm going to say Die Hard gets the stamp of approval on a Christmas movie.
I put it at number 5, so it gets mine also.
Awesome. Well, we have some sort of agreement here. Okay. My number 5 movie is going to be Bad Santa with Billy Bob Thornton. This movie came out all the way back in 2003 and received a 7.0 IMDb rating, which is solid. I mean, that's good. What I remember about this movie is this was so out of the ordinary. It was innovative in that it was a situation where you had a Santa Claus who was basically the worst possible human being. Obviously a thief, but also a drunk, and also, did not treat the children well. And it was really interesting how this movie came out. It was very well received as well when it came out. So it had a $23 million budget and a $76 million worldwide gross. I mean, I think anytime a movie triples its budget, I think that can be considered somewhat of a success. But again, another one of those films that I enjoy watching around the holidays. I believe it's really funny. Bad Santa 2, not a fan of.
No, I haven't seen either of them, to be honest.
Definitely worth a look for one, unless you just are doing flips about Bad Santa. I'd probably pass on Bad Santa 2. But I really liked the unique nature of the film, and always is one when I'm thinking about what movies I'm going to try to look for and record around the holidays to make sure I catch. Bad Santa is always one of them. So that's going to come in at number 5 for me.
My number 4 is, I don't believe it got good reviews, and most people I talked to hated it, but it's The Grinch with Jim Carrey. And I love this movie because it has more catchphrases that I howl over than probably any movie in history. When he... Did you see it?
It's been a very long time. This movie did come out in 2000, so it's just last year celebrated its 20th anniversary.
We saw it at the theater, and we had to be in the front row, and it's absolutely disgusting, so much of it, and Jim Carrey. But I was so taken by the costume and by the stories I'd read for him having to wear these oversized contacts that just practically made him, literally almost insane because they drove him so crazy. The conversations that he has with the dog, the dog, of course, is not going to answer back. And he checks his schedule to see if he can make it to the Who's Christmas. And he says, about jazzercise and how he can't cancel on himself again. Love that.
I was never a big Jim Carrey fan.
I don't know why.
For whatever reason. I did like him in The Truman Show. Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind was a wonderful movie. I actually just caught that not too long ago. Still holds up. Still a great film. So I do think that there were certain films that he did that I did enjoy. I don't know. Something about him just kind of turns me off.
Yeah.
He is not somebody who I look at and think, if he's in a movie, I need to go see it.
My infatuation with him started when my kids watched Sesame Street. And I would sit down with them for that hour and watch that show with them because there were so many adult gags on that show. And, the Black Crows or the Counting Crows, the Jim Carrey was on. He did this thing about his feet, when his feet are happy, they act a certain way. And when they're sad, they act a certain way. And it was hysterical. My kids would cry laughing over it. And I don't know. That's when I first found out his physical comedy is what really gets me.
And he's definitely a wonderful comedian.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is recently I've gotten into watching Comedians in Cars with Jerry Seinfeld.
Oh my
on
gosh,
Netflix.
I love that.
The episode with Jim Carrey is actually
I saw that
really
one
interesting.
because he's really kind of out there in that one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's how he is, just as a human being.
Yeah. He's like, he's so, I don't know, artsy, if that's the right word. He's just sort of just
avant-garde.
Avant-garde. He's just kind of his own guy.
So about The Grinch Is So Christmas, this is surprising. A budget of $123 million.
Yeah.
Worldwide, $345 million. Pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But only a 6.2. So not horrible reviews, but definitely not one of those that is going to stand out to you and say, wow, you definitely have to go see this one. Interesting how that, and do you know who directed this movie?
It's Richie from Happy Days.
Opie.
Yeah.
Opie from
Yeah.
Andy Griffith's Show,
Yeah.
Richie from the Happy Days, Ron Howard himself.
I couldn't get it.
directed The Grinch That Stole Christmas. It's so interesting when we talk about Ron Howard, some of the films that he has made over the years.
Yes.
I mean, I'm just going to go down and just try to pick a couple of them off. Apollo 13, Ransom, Backdraft, Willow, A Beautiful Mind, The Da Vinci Code. I mean, this is just some of them. There's plenty more. Yeah. He's literally, an AAA lister in terms of directors.
I just watched Cinderella Man last night. What a great movie that was.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen that as well. But yeah, Ron Howard, the director of The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, coming in at number 4 for Leslie. I'm going to go with one of my true guilty pleasures, and my number 4 is going to be Will Ferrell's Elf.
Oh,
one of my favorite movies. And, when I first saw it, I was always under the impression, like, I didn't necessarily care for it. Like, the first time or two, I'm like, yeah, that's funny. But I don't think that that's going to be one that really hangs around in my rotation. I do like Will Ferrell.
Yeah.
Again, he's not my favorite, but I do love him as a comedian. We watched this last year, and I don't remember laughing so hard when he's dumping syrup on spaghetti. I mean, it's just like it's so funny, and he's just so innocent.
That's it for me. It's much higher on my list. If you will, I won't give it away quite yet, but it captures the essence of childhood in an adult-sized body. When he sits on Bob Newhart's lap, I almost die every time. That movie is perfectly cast.
Oh, without a doubt.
James Caan, it's like him in Misery. It's the same deadpan performance that this guy is incredulous that he is stuck in this situation, and he finally gets used to it.
I love Zooey Deschanel.
Oh
in this
my
character.
gosh, she's perfect.
And it's so interesting because when you first see her, obviously this was one. I don't want to say her first, but one of her first major roles in Hollywood. And she was blonde, and then I don't ever remember seeing her as a blonde ever since then. And it's almost like, yes, she just changed her hair color. It's almost like it's a different person. Now, yes, I understand that this movie came out in 2003.
Right.
So she was much younger then, too.
Yeah.
But, I mean, she couldn't have been more than in her early 20s at that time.
She gets to show off her singing voice and how amazing and talented and how just downright lovable she turned out to be.
I always found it interesting that she hadn't done more in her career.
Yeah.
She's obviously in a lot of different things.
Right.
I mean, I'm just looking at her IMDb page right now. She keeps busy, but she never really got to that next step after some of the early films and television that she did. But definitely for me, my favorite character in this whole thing. And of course, Peter Dinklage from Game of Thrones also in there.
He's perfect. When he goes flying across the table at him for saying about being a little person or something like that. Oh my God. I just love that movie.
A $33 million budget with $223 million worldwide, a huge, and here's another one. I'm actually really surprised that they never made a 2.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating for it.
No.
You know my feelings about that. But this is one of those movies that easily could have been remade. And maybe it's for the best that they didn't.
Right.
This one does come in at a 7.0. So again, solid ratings here. We're not seeing, outside of Die Hard, which got a 9.4, which we'll talk about in a minute. Most of these movies are kind of just sort of middle of the road in terms of critical acclaim, at least using the IMDb rating, which is what we've always used. So why
that's what I go. That's my go-to too.
So, okay, so far I've got Bad Santa and Elf, and you have Die Hard and The Grinch. So now it's going to be my turn, and we're going to go back to Die Hard. And again, I think that we've talked about that in quite some depth. But the only other thing that I want to bring up is that, Die Hard did get an 8.2 rating on IMDb. It's actually a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I saw that was very, very interesting. One of the things that I did want to point out, right after this, I loved watching Die Hard so much, I turned on Die Hard 2. And again, I don't know to what extent you remember this.
I do,
last time you saw it.
Yeah.
This movie also tried to play on the Christmas theme. Unfortunately, with Die Hard 2, it abandoned it very early. Now, there is snow.
Yes.
And a lot of the movie is based around snow. I think part of the issue that I had with 2 is that it really just tried to be a carbon copy of 1.
Yeah.
I think that outside of some of the like I said, the weather, for example, I think it was almost tried to play too closely to the original.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons I really liked Die Hard with a Vengeance, because it was totally different.
That's the Samuel L. Jackson one.
Yes.
Yeah.
So totally different, same character.
Right.
But 1 and 2 from Die Hard, filmed, released only really 2 years apart. It almost seemed like they were just going for the buck and,
Yeah.
and not necessarily going and really poor reviews from what I've seen on 2.
Yeah.
And I don't want to belabor this point any further in terms of Die Hard, but you know, we both at least tentatively agree. We had a little, you know, you kind of thought one thing about what it was, and I kind of thought another thing, but at least we can both at least have a consensus that Die Hard should be in the top 5. How about your number 3?
My number 3 is Christmas Vacation, which I adore. Again, I think I've said this on previous podcasts, but all I have to do is look at Chevy Chase and I smile because he just completely captures my imagination. It just completely tickles me. Even now, when I see him on TikTok, I still laugh and I still listen to whatever he has to say because he's just so charming. I can hardly stand it.
One of the interesting things about Christmas Vacation, which is going to be on my list, so this is going to be a short back end of the top 5.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk a little bit more when I get to my section about this, but a couple pieces of trivia that if you do get to check out this film, I think that you're going to appreciate. First of all, this was filmed on a lot out in California. So all of the snow in the movie is fake. And there's only really, if I recall, one scene where you can see breath.
Mm-hmm.
If they are in Illinois in the middle of December, certainly at night, but during the day too, you're going to see breath, condensation.
I never even noticed that.
Whatever have you. So that's one of the things that I always remembered that was really, really interesting. Also, recently, Chevy Chase did a special event at a theater, probably in California, I didn't see exactly where, that he did almost like a commentary. So it was a theater, they screened the movie, and then he had a talk back after the film. And I thought that was really interesting. The tickets were like $600 or something crazy. But I really think that it's funny that when most people think about this franchise, this is the film that they come to, even though it was the third in a series of 4. And you could certainly, I guess, argue that there was a Christmas Vacation too. I'm not sure to what point that you're aware of that.
Yeah.
Focusing on Cousin Eddie, again, from everything I've heard, not something worth watching. But a 7.6 came out in 1989. It had a $27 million budget. Here's what's really interesting to me when I was looking about this last night. $73 million gross worldwide. Seems extremely low, certainly when we're looking at some of the other things. But again, you have to remember, this series was never really more than sort of a cult following. Even the original Vacation and European Vacation, they were good, they were highly regarded, and they were funny.
Yeah.
But this wasn't, and it's not like Chevy Chase has ever been a box office superstar.
No.
He's not, he's typically a complimentary piece.
Right. Well, the Fletch movies I absolutely adore too. They're so politically incorrect now, but I still, there's some kind of freshness about the way he did things, his own way. And the cast in Christmas Vacation everyone is stellar at what they do. And I just love it. I laugh my head off at that movie.
I want to wait to talk about one of the reasons why this is so important to me when we get to mine.
Sure.
So I don't want to undersell this, but we'll come back to Christmas Vacation here momentarily. All right, up to my number 2 is going to be Home Alone. This was a film that I remember seeing in the theater. Came out in 1990.
How old would you have been then?
9.
Oh, my. See?
9 years old.
Prime time.
Yes, and this was something that... this was a film that I always remembered. I guess really until... I don't know, maybe about 10 years, 12 years after is really when it, to me, felt like it was becoming regarded as a Christmas movie.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I'm seeing some common elements here. Yes, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. Yes, Elf. Yes, Bad Santa. They're all in the name. But here is where we're starting to see, almost coming back to that conversation we had earlier about what is a Christmas movie? Does it need to be about Christmas? Because if you think about it, is Home Alone really about Christmas? Sure, there are Christmas references. He puts up a tree. There's snow on the ground. But to your earlier point about Die Hard, the whole reason for this is because the family is going on a Christmas vacation, pardon the pun, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think that people, in a general sense, when we're trying to think about Christmas movies, have an issue. This, to me, even though as we look at the movie poster, there's a huge Christmas tree on it, I believe now people consider this a Christmas movie.
Right.
I don't think initially people did.
I'm guessing they didn't either. I've seen the movie, and hearing about it again makes me. I'm definitely going to revisit it.
This
very
isn't
soon.
one of your yearly watches.
It is not, but Macaulay Culkin. So if you were 9, this is how much older I am. I was married 5 years then. And he got on my nerves as a child actor so badly that I just can't. Now, like his siblings, I think are amazing. And I'm sure he's probably amazing in his own way. But as a child, that was just my idea of torture. So, but I think I need to revisit that.
One thing before we move on to some of the box office discussions. I don't know if are you a fan of American Horror Story?
I have mixed feelings about it.
So he was in this season.
Oh, really?
Macaulay Culkin.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm not going to go into what he played because it was... Anyway, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But it's definitely interesting to see how his career has evolved over time. Obviously, he well-documented struggles with alcohol and drugs and other issues. And it almost... You wonder about some of these child actors or child superstars and to what extent being exposed to popular culture, what impact that has on these individuals.
Well, when you become and I'm just speculating here, but when you become your family's meal ticket, that's a lot of pressure for a kid. I just can't imagine putting any of my kids, okay, you're the top earner in the family. This is how we're putting bread on the table. Get busy, kid. I don't think I could have done that to my children.
Home Alone comes in at a 7.6, which is probably one of the higher ones, again, outside of Die Hard. $18 million budget, $476 million worldwide, including almost $300 million in the United States alone.
Yeah.
Now this, which is really interesting if you think about it, because the opening weekend was only $17 million, and as a holiday type of film, it came out November 18th, meaning it only had 5 weeks. So for it to gross over $300 million, it had to have some pretty significant staying power.
Yeah.
Which means that people were probably watching it into January and even February, you would imagine. Lots of really interesting trivia here. Again, I don't want to go into this in great detail, but just one that sits at the top of IMDb. Joe Pesci deliberately avoided Macaulay Culkin on set because he wanted to stay in character and have Macaulay Culkin think he was a mean person, which I think is so interesting. Again, here's another situation where they came out with a 2. The 2 is... let's just say I like Home Alone 2 better than I like Die Hard 2. Yeah. But again, this just goes to speak to some of the things that we've talked about in terms of original screenplays over the years. When you come with 2, you can't just make it a template of the first movie.
No, something different has to happen.
It's got to be. Now, I would say that 2 does have some different elements, namely how the parents leave him at home again, except this time it's in New York. Of course, there was a lot of contention during our previous president because he was in it. Some networks were editing him out entirely. I mean, he was in it as a cameo. But when I think of Christmas movies in my life right now, Home Alone is without a doubt one that sits at the top and resonates with me, and one that I'm 100% going to watch the week of Christmas.
For sure. Well, and it's, I didn't even consider because when I was a child, Rudolph was a made-for-television movie. I think it was only an hour probably. And those were what I thought of as Christmas. And honestly, I still try to catch Rudolph at least once. But this is such a different... we're talking about such different movies here. But I guess I could mention my number 2 it probably will be very much more popular with your wife than it is with you. And it's called Love Actually. And I have a huge crush on Colin Firth and that goofy character he does play in a lot of his movies. But this movie has, 10 not 10, probably 5 different stories going on, and they all sort of come together. But it is a true guilty pleasure, and I laugh and find something funny about it every single time I watch it.
I'm not even familiar with this. I would assume that Jackie probably would be. Did come in at a 7.6. In terms of box office, we'd be looking at a $40 million budget, $245 million worldwide, only 60 in the United States.
It's it's a British movie, and it's almost everybody in it. There's even a little gag where one of the characters goes to the United States to find women that will find him appealing because he's not that cute, but the women fall in love with his accent, which is a trope used in movies too. But it's just such a charming, funny movie and the little love stories are just it's a rom-com, but it's definitely a Christmas movie.
I'm glad that you are that our lists are different.
Yeah.
I mean, we definitely have a couple of the same, but I love that our lists are different because this is. I'm actually looking for some interesting Christmas movies to watch, and obviously, if this is one that you think very highly of,
if you want to snuggle up with your wife and make her happy, if she hasn't seen this, you're in for a treat.
Oh, I'm positive she'll
love it. I think it's going to get on your nerves a little bit, but it's well done.
I'm not a fan of the romantic comedy genre, but I've seen romantic comedies that are good.
Yeah.
I told you how much I love La La Land.
Yeah.
And I would frankly definitely consider that a romantic comedy. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, I hate genre. But that's my point is I hate that we have to try to classify things. I don't dislike those types of movies, romantic comedies. Here's what's also interesting about this movie, and I don't know to what extent you know this. Gentleman by the name of Richard Curtis wrote and directed this movie, and I wonder to what extent that goes back to some of our auteurism discussions. He's got an immense, I honestly am not familiar with this person, but an immense background of films.
Yeah, I'll have to look at it. There's another one that I would suspect would be in the same grouping. It's called About a Boy, and that has a bit of a Christmas theme to it too, but it's the very similar kind of movie. Hugh Grant is also in this, and it's classic Hugh Grant. It's what made him famous, this style of acting. I've seen him in things where he plays someone edgy, and he's terrific at it, but not many people have given him a chance to be edgy.
Interesting. So Love Actually coming in at number 2 for Leslie. Well, my number 1 is going to be Christmas Vacation, and I don't want to belabor this piece other than to share with you part of the reason that I think that this movie made it number 1 for me, and kind of a little bit of a spoiler to our next episode that we're going to do. What is so unique about this movie to me, and this is me personally, and that's one of the things that I love about film, is that it is such a personal thing.
Yes.
This is a movie that every year, as long as I can remember, my family has gotten together and watched. When I was younger, but I guess still when I was in the house, we watched it. But it was always our Christmas Eve tradition because while I was still like in college and right when I moved back home from college, we would still go over to my grandma's house for the meal on Christmas. So I would always come over to my parents and we would watch Christmas Vacation on Christmas Eve. That was our Christmas Eve tradition. And then sometimes we'd stay over, sometimes we'd go home and get back together the next day. Well, about probably 2014, when I moved into my own place and my grandma was in her mid-80s, we decided that, hey, she's put in her time doing the holiday meals. I'm going to take it over. Well, now it's become a Christmas tradition when my family comes over. I always record it, and we always just sit there and watch it. And I don't know why we watch it. We can sit there and quote the entire movie. I mean, I know it word for word. My parents do too. But whatever, like, it's funny.
Yeah.
It's edgy.
Yeah.
It's even like, my grandma always says the same. It's a little too much for my grandma, but she kind of deals with it because she knows that it's tradition.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that, to me, is such an important part about film, is that it can become ingrained in our lives in ways that whoever thought it might be? And that's what's so interesting to me about this movie is when I think about Christmas Vacation, I don't just necessarily think about Chevy Chase and the lights and the tree on the top of their car at the beginning of the movie and Cousin Eddie and Brian Doyle Murray and a big bow.
Yeah.
I think about tradition.
Yeah.
I think about how it has found its way into my family's annual holiday traditions. And that to me is why, without question, that this is my number one.
Well, and I will second what you said. Now, I don't have quite the tradition with my number one, which is Elf, as you do, but it's one of those movies. It's a rare movie that you can sit down. I could sit down with my young children and watch. I can sit down with my adult children now and watch. And we all laugh at it. It had just enough potty humor with the big long burp and just enough. It was touching, but yet it was still so funny. And then that whole thing of, Will Ferrell being basically a child in a, 6'3" body that was way too big for everything. And just captured that innocence of believing in Santa and, seeing someone pretending to be Santa and saying that you're not Santa. I love everything about it. And so, yeah, I feel the same way about the tradition. Anytime it comes on, I have a hard time walking away from it.
Are you going to be watching that?
Oh my
with your
gosh,
family?
Yes. Over that week. Yeah.
I love how our top films do hold a special place in our heart from a different perspective than just being a movie fan.
Yes, exactly.
And it shows what and why. Let me put it this way. One of the things that I've had to deal with, since I've started my PhD program and with some of the things that I'm writing about, I don't know that people necessarily believe that the things that I'm writing about are important. I read... and I can't tell you exactly where I read this. It was in some of the reading that talked about those who write about popular culture, which is something that I've been doing and intend to continue doing, and why it's important. And it's important because aspects of popular culture, whether it's music, whether it's movies, whether it's other aspects of popular video game culture that's huge now, and many others, these things are important to us, whether it's music, whether it's movies. It helps us create a self-identity.
Right.
When we think of who we are as people, as humans, we think about our favorite bands.
Yes.
Or our favorite directors.
Right.
And those are the things that have really brought us together as an American culture.
Right.
And it shows the value of studying these things.
Right.
And I think that is, to me, what's so important about the work that I'm doing and looking at, because of not only the amount of money on a studio's perspective and the amount of jobs and the amount of people who work in the industry, but it's the impact that these films have on people.
Right.
Now, and I'll give you a perfect example. I'm not a fan of Marvel. I'll go see, my son likes Spider-Man, so I'll do that. I might be the only person to ever say this. Outside of the Iron Man movies, I've never seen any of them. Wow. I've never seen any Captain America. I've never seen any of the Avengers movies.
That surprises me, but I'm kind of glad to know it, because I think that, like when you talk about the retreads, a lot of them are sort of a retread of the last one, in many ways.
It's all retread.
Yeah.
I mean, they keep coming up with different scenarios.
Characters and things and different costumes and different kinds of ways to blow things up, but it's basically all the same story.
It's just not for me. I did enjoy the original Iron Man pictures, and
they're fun.
Yeah,
they are fun.
And it's not to say I wouldn't watch some of these and maybe not like them.
Sure.
I probably would. It's just not the type of thing. A lot of them are so long.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not, I don't even want to get into that here. But it all comes back to the point that the people who do like those movies, that's how they identify with other people.
Well, you have hit on such an important, and I don't think I even realized it until you started talking about how important pop culture is to us. But, for me, movies, I have always said, are an escape. It's a way that I could live vicariously through a character that I would never do anything that character did. And then I'm fascinated with the lives and the business of making movies. when I find out that an actor was drawn to a character for a certain reason, or the sacrifices they made, and I know they're getting a lot of money to do it, but, Christian Bale, for example, how much weight has he gained and lost over his lifetime to make a character believable? I'm fascinated by that. And then, like you said, music, if you watched any of these, especially the next podcast where we're going to talk about movies that changed our lives, if you watched any of them with no sound, they would not be the movies they are.
Oh, without a doubt.
And I've bought soundtracks because of hearing them in movies.
I'm almost sad that the whole soundtrack thing has gone away.
I know. It's not the same.
No.
It's not the same. But I know I still seek them out because I know certain movies are going to give me a collection of songs I want to hear over and over and relive those moments.
Without question.
Yeah.
Well, we've got into some pretty deep stuff here today. So just as a recap, Leslie's top 5 is Die Hard, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas with Jim Carrey, Christmas Vacation, Love Actually, and Elf. Whereas for me, Bad Santa, Elf, Die Hard, Home Alone, and Christmas Vacation. So those are a quick recap. We also established, Leslie, of course, the importance of studying and discussing popular culture. But I think the most important thing here is we determined that Die Hard is a Christmas movie. So there you go. There you have it. So any final thoughts in terms of our holiday films?
No, it was just such a, I'm so excited that we had 2 movies or 3 movies that we agreed on.
Both Christmas Vacation and Die Hard.
Yeah. I wasn't sure we'd be that close, but anyway, it just was so much fun. It's always fun to tear into this with you.
Well, I appreciate that. All right. Well, real quick, I want to just give you guys a quick announcement. Leslie is graduating, and so we are going to do our final Nights at the Movies podcast in January. We're not going to say it's the series finale because Leslie's not going anywhere. Maybe down the line we come out with another episode or 2. But in terms of our regular monthly schedule, next month will be our final episode. And we're going to end with something, and we've taken a lot of time to think about what we were going to end with. We are going to end with films that changed our lives. So tune back in January for our season finale episode of Nights at the Movies. So, Leslie, as always, it's such a pleasure to chat with you. I look forward to doing this again next month.
I just loved it. Thank you.
Of course. All right, that's going to do it for this episode at Nights at the Movies. We will see you again in January.